Hey all, welcome back to the worst channel on YouTube. I'm Matt, and I run this channel. This is my series on religion, and more specifically Buddhism. In the last episode, I addressed my objections to the Abrahamic faiths, Christianity included. But in today's episode, I want to cover an interpretation of Christianity that is similar to Buddhism, and that I could definitely get on board with. It's called Gnosticism. So, to start out, I will say that Gnosticism is not a new idea. After Jesus died, there were three main branches of Christianity that sprung up. There was the Christianity preached by the disciples who knew Jesus and were all Jewish. There was a new brand of Christianity preached by Paul, who never met Jesus but claimed to be a posthumous disciple and saw visions of him. And then there were the Gnostics. The differences were pretty plainly obvious. The disciples preached what might be called Messianic Judaism today. They believed that you had to be Jewish to be saved, and that Jesus had come to save only the chosen people. Paul preached a Gentile version of Christianity, which came to be called Catholicism, which of course everybody knows about now. And then there were the Gnostics, who have been experiencing a small revival these days, and we're going to cover them more in depth here. But first, one must understand that for many Christians, the term Gnosticism is synonymous with, Satanism. This has its origins in the Catholic Church because when the Roman Empire converted to Catholicism, the two other branches were stamped out and declared heretical. And because of this, Gnosticism was one of the very first things declared as blasphemy and heresy. Therefore, I expect this video to get a lot of criticism from Christians, but I ask that you please keep an open mind and ignore the fact that this is considered heretical for just the next few minutes. So with that said, let's get into it. So, the Gnostics have a complex history that isn't easily related, but their beliefs are more easily explained. The Gnostics believed that Jesus came to save mankind, same as the Catholics, however they differ in terms of what we were being saved from. The Catholics believed that Jesus came to save mankind from their sins. The Gnostics, on the other hand, believe that Jesus came to save the world from God. So, in Gnostic belief and scriptures, the God of the Old Testament is called Samael, or the Demiurge. He is an imperfect, spiritually blind tyrant who falsely believes that he is the only God. He was created by accident, and when he woke up, he was blinded to the spiritual world, and therefore believed that he was the only being in existence, and therefore God himself. This being, the Demiurge, then created the world and populated it with mindless slaves known as humans. These slaves were kept in the dark, both spiritually and intellectually, and were forced to worship this twisted, imperfect slave driver, and were told that they were living in paradise, when nothing could be further from the truth. Eventually, the Holy Spirit, who is part of the true God, took pity on these empty vessels known as humans, and descended to earth to help them. The Holy Spirit then breathed souls into these vessels to give them a spiritual life, and by doing this, the humans gained knowledge of what good and evil were. And this story is immortalized in the myth of the Garden of Eden. Humans gaining the knowledge of good and evil was their first step towards liberation from being slaves to the Demiurge. The Demiurge was infuriated at this, learning that he was not the only being in existence with power, and from then on this creature began to try and keep his grip on mankind as tight as possible. He then punished the first humans by casting them out of his version of paradise and cursing them with a limited lifespan so that they could never live long enough to learn to escape. Instead, their souls would constantly be reborn in new bodies that had no memory of what they had experienced before. He then picked a chosen people to try and keep the rest of the world in line, and tried to intimidate everyone into worshiping him through fear, terror, genocide, and violence. The fact that the world was created by such an imperfect, blind entity explains why things are so messed up, and the origin of evil. However, the Holy Spirit and the true God, simply called the Father, began a plan to save mankind from the grip of the Demiurge. Throughout history, the Father intervened to help out these slaves, culminating in sending his Son, Jesus, to ultimately save mankind from the grips of the Old Testament deity. Jesus came down in the form of a man to teach mankind that love is more important than any of the laws prescribed by the Demiurge, and to teach men that they have souls and can escape from their bondage here on earth. Jesus also taught that the demiurge's greatest weapon was death, and he created it to keep spirits enslaved. He made sure that humans had a very short lifespan so that the souls inside of them would have to be reborn over and over and could never learn the truth of their condition. However, Jesus was able to overcome this problem and demonstrated to people that death had no power whatsoever in the long run, and this is why his resurrection was so important and central to Gnostic belief as it is in traditional Christianity. So in other words, Jesus not only preached that the demiurge could be overcome, but he also proved it to everyone with his resurrection. Now, naturally, because of this role reversal in Gnosticism, there is no such thing as the devil. Satan, which is a word that is not a name, but it actually means adversary, was actually the god of the Old Testament, the demiurge, Samael, the blind one. In Gnostic theology, therefore, Satan is the one who actually created the world, and his entire plan is to keep humans enslaved here for eternity, worshiping him. The Father, Son, and Holy Spirit intervene to save mankind from Satan and from this bondage, and continue to do so every day. Clearly, one can see why this belief system was considered heretical by the Catholic Church, but one must also remember that history is written by the victors. In Gnosticism, there is no hell. Hell is merely the life we live now, and we will continue to experience this life in continual rebirth until we free ourselves. But that's the question. How does one free themselves? Clearly, there are many parallels between Buddhism and Gnosticism. They both claim that this world is hell, and the purpose of life is to escape. In both religions, the gods are considered imperfect beings that are not necessarily worthy of worship. Also, the central figure came and taught mankind how to liberate themselves from the world. In Buddhism, achieving nirvana by following the Eightfold Path is the way to liberation. In Gnosticism, secret knowledge imparted by Jesus is the way to salvation. Unfortunately, we only have fragments of the Gnostic Gospels nowadays, so we don't have a complete picture of what this knowledge was, although we do have small pieces. The Gnostic Gospels are easy enough to access, just search for them online and you can read them quite easily. Because of the similarities between Buddhism and Gnosticism, some scholars believe that Jesus studied in the East and took some of these teachings to his disciples when he began his ministry. Although I will say I've never seen compelling enough evidence to suggest that this was true, although I think it's an interesting theory. Regardless, there are a lot of parallels, and personally I do firmly believe that this is the correct interpretation of Jesus' teachings and the Bible in general. In the last episode, I harped on how evil and terrible the God of the Old Testament was, but how I had a different opinion of Jesus. And this is what I meant. I firmly believe that Jesus came to save the world from God rather than from sin. Because of this, snakes and serpents are important symbols in Gnosticism as they represent wisdom, and this is why Jesus says that people should be as wise as serpents in the New Testament. Now, the question is, why am I Buddhist and not Gnostic? Well, there's a couple of reasons.
And that's when Maybe decided to become a devout Christian.
Do you guys know where I could get one of those gold necklaces with a T on it?
That's a cross.
Across from where?
First off, Gnosticism is only just now experiencing a revival, and so Gnostic communities and groups are very rare and disorganized. This isn't inherently bad, but because we don't have a complete copy of the Gnostic text, it's, in my opinion, an incomplete religion. Because of that, even if it were true, I don't think it's necessarily possible to follow it completely, as the religion itself is incomplete. And the second reason I'm not a Gnostic is because I don't believe it's necessarily true. Yes, I think this is the correct way to interpret the Bible, and that this is definitely what Jesus meant in his teachings, but I don't necessarily believe in the entire expanded theology. So in other words, while it makes sense, I think that Jesus and his disciples believed this, but I'm not sure it's the actual truth of existence. My opinion could change for sure, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that if I were a Christian, I would be a Gnostic. So, those are my thoughts on the Abrahamic religions, and Christianity in particular. I know this is a controversial topic, but no one sees my videos anyway, so I think we're all good. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you enjoyed, please don't forget to like and subscribe. I upload every Saturday, And yeah, I'll see you next time.